Hi, and welcome to Today is Tomorrow's Past, where we look at history in a nutshell. Today we're looking at the history of Samuel Pepys. Remember, if you love history as much as I do, please do subscribe to my channel for more great videos like this, and give my video a thumbs up. Samuel Pepys was born on the 23rd of February 1632 in Fleet Street, London. The son of John, a tailor, and Margaret Kite, daughter of a Whitechapel butcher. Pepys died on the 26th of May 1703, aged just 59. He was one of 11 children, but due to high child mortality, he soon became the oldest of his siblings. From a young age, Pepys suffered from ill health, specifically bladder stones, a condition from which his mother and brother also suffered. He was almost never without pain, and often mentions his health and discomfort throughout his diary. By the age of 22, his condition was very severe. Pepys decided to undergo surgery, not an easy option in 1657. Nevertheless, Pepys was operated on the 26th of March 1658. The operation took place in a bedroom in the house of his cousin. The surgeon would have likely used something similar to this lithotomy cachet meaning hidden in French. The surgical instrument had a hidden blade, which the surgeon would release using a spring handle once inserted into the bladder. The surgery had risks, and errors could easily lead to internal bleeding. The operation on Pepys was, however, a success, and he resolved to hold a celebration on every anniversary of the operation, which he did for several years. In 1650, Pepys attended Cambridge University, but later received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Magdalene College in 1654. He went on to become an administrator of the English Navy, but is certainly most famous for the wonderful diary he kept for a decade, beginning on New Year's Day 1660. Perhaps to protect his security, or perhaps simply because he never intended anyone else to read the diary, Pepys wrote the whole thing in a little-known shorthand. We see here an example of what his shorthand would have looked like on his original manuscripts. He also even used a mixture of Spanish, Italian, and sometimes French phrases. Pepys described in vivid detail such things as the plague, the Great Fire of London of 1666, and his country's turbulent political stance at the time. As he began to write his diary, England was just recovering from a civil war, and Oliver Cromwell had died just 2 years previously. Pepys, being a Cromwell supporter, Pepys soon converted to being a royalist and was actually present on a ship which brought home the then King Charles II, after he had fled England for Europe, after Cromwell had defeated him. His diary gives us a unique window into a long-forgotten time. Pepys enjoyed the finer things in life and greatly enjoyed visiting the theatre. He commented often on plays he'd seen and gave his review of both the acting and the plot, even commenting on early Shakespeare's work. Pepys had a love of fine clothing, and as his wealth grew, he enjoyed spending his money on beautifully crafted coats and jackets made of velvet and silk. He also had a passion for music and enjoyed singing, playing and composing. He played 5 different instruments of the time, including the viol and the lute. At the age of 22, Pepys married 14-year-old Elizabeth de St. Michael on the 10th of October 1655. They never had children, and it's possible that the operation Pepys had had as a young adult could have been responsible for this, perhaps leaving him infertile, but there's no evidence to suggest this. In 1660, Pepys and his wife moved to Seething Lane, near to the Tower of London. Seething Lane is still there, and there is now also a street named after Pepys, aptly named Pepys Street. Samuel and his wife had a seemingly turbulent marriage, and he often spoke of the arguments they had, often with regards to money or the servants in the house. Pepys would on occasion raise his hand to his wife and their servants, and on a few occasions wrote about the injuries they had sustained at his hand.
I was very angry and began to find fault with my wife for not commanding her servants as she ought. Thereupon, she giving me some cross answer, I did strike her over her left eye, such a blow as the poor wretch did cry out, and was in great pain. But yet her spirit was such to endeavour to bite and scratch me. But I, coying with her, made her leave crying, and sent for butter and parsley, and friends presently one with another, and I up vexed at my heart to think what had I done, for she was forced to lay poultice or something to her eye all day, and is black, and the people of the house observed it. At supper, hearing by accident of my maids, their letting in a roving Scotch woman that haunts the office, to help them wash and scour in our house, and that very lately I fell mightily out, and made my wife, to the disturbance of the house and neighbours, to beat our little girl, and then we shut her down in the cellar, and there she lay all night, so we went to bed.
Pepys engaged in many extramarital liaisons with many women, and often wrote about some of them in some detail.
After that I went to walk, and meeting Mrs. Lane of Westminster Hall, I took her to my lord's, and did give her a bottle of wine in the garden, where Mr. Fairbrother of Cambridge did come and found us, and drank with us. After that I took her to my house, where I was exceeding free in dallying with her, and she not unfree to take it.
The Great Plague, lasting from 1665 to 1666, was the last major epidemic of the bubonic plague to occur in England. Pepys first referenced the plague in August 1661, but by late 1663 was starting to note the growth of the disease in Holland and France.
The plague is much in Amsterdam, and we in fears of it here, which God defend.
By early June 1665, Pepys is mentioning the plague on almost a daily basis, observing the effects on the people around him and noting the growth in deaths. The Great Plague killed an estimated 100,000 people, almost a quarter of London's population, in just 18 months.
The town grows very sickly, and people to be afeard of it. They are dying this last week of the plague, 112 from 43 the week before. This day I informed myself that there died 4 or 5 at Westminster of the plague, in one alley in several houses upon Sunday last, Bell Alley, over against the Palace Gate. Yet people do think that the number will be fewer in the town than it was last week. This day I am told Dr. Burnin, my physician, is this morning dead of the plague, which is strange, his man dying so long ago, and his house this month open again, now himself dead, poor unfortunate man. I hear sickness is, and indeed is, scattered almost everywhere. They're dying 1,089 of the plague this week.
The fire is reported to have started on Pudding Lane on the 3rd of September 1666 and raged until the 6th of September 1666.
Jane called us up about 3 in the morning to tell us of a great fire they saw in the city, so I rose and slipped on my nightgown and went to her window, and thought it to be on the backside of Mark Lane at the farthest, but being unused to such fires as followed, I thought it far enough off, and so went to bed again. By and by, Jane comes and tells me that she hears that above 300 houses have been burned down tonight by the fire we saw, and that it is now burning down All Fish Street by London Bridge. I did see the houses at the end of the bridge all on fire, and an infinite great fire on this and the other side, the end of the bridge.
Pepys's health suffered from the long hours that he worked throughout the period of his diary, and this ultimately led to him having to reluctantly conclude his diary on the 31st of May, 1669. Pepys and his wife took a holiday to France in June 1669, but upon their return, Elizabeth fell very ill and died unexpectedly on the 10th of November 1669. Elizabeth was just 29 when she died of typhoid fever. Pepys went on to erect a monument of her in the church St Olave's Hart Street, London. In the years that followed, Pepys had many difficult times. In 1679, Pepys was elected as a politician for Harwich. However, by May of that same year, they were under attack from their political enemies. Pepys was imprisoned in the Tower of London on suspicion of treasonable correspondence with France. The charges are believed to have been fabricated under the direction of Anthony Ashley Cooper, the 1st Earl of Shaftesbury. Samuel was released in July 1679, but proceedings against them were not dropped until June 1680. Pepys was again imprisoned on suspicion of Jacobitism from May to July 1689, and again in June 1690. Jacobitism, or Jacobites, was a movement in the 17th and 18th century which believed that kings were appointed by God and had a divine right to the throne. So when James II went into exile in 1688, the Parliament of England decided he had abandoned his country and his throne was offered instead to his daughter and her husband, William III. The Jacobites believed this was wrong, and that nobody had the right to remove anyone from the throne, supposedly including Pepys. No charges were ever successfully brought against Pepys, and he was again released, and he moved to Clapham 10 years later in 1701. Pepys lived there until his death on the 26th of May, 1703. He had no children and bequeathed his estate to his unmarried nephew, John Jackson. Pepys was buried alongside his wife Elizabeth in St Olave's Church, Hart Street, in London.